Iowa, spring 1922. The farm stood alone, surrounded by fields that stretched into silence. No nearby neighbors, no passing roads, just wind moving through tall grass and the steady rhythm of animals waiting to be fed. Hinterkaifeck was not a place where things happened. Until they did. The Gruber family lived a hard, isolated life. Andreas Gruber, strict, controlling, feared more than respected. His wife, Cecilia, quiet, worn down by years of labor. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabrielle, recently returned home with her two small children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. 6 souls under one roof. And one farmhand, Maria Baumgartner, who arrived on March 31st, her very first day of work. She would never see a second. Days before the murders, Andreas noticed something strange. Footprints. They came from the forest, and they stopped at the edge of the farm. No footprints leading back. Then came other signs. The sound of footsteps in the attic at night. A newspaper that appeared on the kitchen table, one no one in the family had purchased. Tools that went missing, then mysteriously returned. Andreas mentioned these things to neighbors, but he never left. Never called police. Never ran. On the evening of March 31st, someone lured members of the family into the barn. One by one. No screams were heard. No gunshots. Only the dull, final sound of a farming tool raised and brought down with precision. By the time it was over, 4 bodies lay stacked beneath hay. Inside the house, 2 more waited in silence. And then, the killer did not leave. For days after the murders, smoke rose from the chimney. Animals were fed. Meals were prepared. The house appeared lived in. Neighbors passed by and felt uneasy, but nothing looked wrong enough to act. Life continued at Hinterkaifeck, just without the family. It wasn't until April 4th that concern turned to horror. When neighbors finally entered the barn, they found what remained. 6 bodies. 1 weapon. No signs of forced entry. And the most disturbing realization of all, whoever murdered the Gruber family had stayed, watched, and walked away unseen. The discovery did not come with screams. It came with silence. On April 4th, 1922, neighbors grew uneasy. The mail had piled up. The children hadn't been seen at school. Smoke still rose from the chimney, but no one answered the door. That was when they decided to go in. The barn was first. A lantern swung slowly as the men stepped inside, boots crunching over straw. The air was heavy. Not yet the stench of decay, but something unmistakably wrong. Then they saw the hay, disturbed, pressed down. When they pulled it aside, the truth revealed itself in layers. 4 bodies, stacked. Andreas Gruber, his wife, Cecilia, Victoria, little Cecilia. Each skull crushed with the same brutal precision. The weapon, a mattock, a farming tool, lay nearby, its metal head darkened. Shock turned into disbelief, and disbelief turned into horror when they entered the house. In the bedroom, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, lay in her bed, killed where she slept on her very first night. In the crib nearby, 2-year-old Josef, dead. What followed was chaos. Too many people entered the crime scene. Neighbors touched the bodies, moved them, covered them. Evidence vanished with every step. By the time police arrived, the scene was already compromised beyond repair. But even in the ruins of procedure, something stood out. Animals had been fed after the murders. Meals had been eaten. The stove had been used. Someone had lived in the house after everyone was already dead. Investigators searched the attic. Nothing. The house showed no signs of forced entry, no locks broken, no windows shattered. Whoever did this knew the farm, or had been watching it. The autopsies revealed more. The blows were deliberate, controlled, overkill. And one detail chilled even hardened investigators. Little Cecilia had lived for hours after the attack, pulling her own hair in agony until she finally died. The village was paralyzed. Fear spread quickly. If the killer could stay in the house, then he could be anywhere. Suspects began to surface. Old grudges, family secrets, whispers of incest, rumors neighbors had ignored for years. But none could be proven. No arrests were made. No clear motive emerged. And as the farmhouse stood empty, wind moving through broken windows, one question refused to go away. How does someone murder an entire family and simply disappear? With no stranger to arrest, investigators turned inward, toward the people who knew Hinterkaifeck best. The Gruber family was not loved. Andreas Gruber in particular had enemies. He was harsh, controlling, known for violent temper. Neighbors avoided him. Children were warned to stay away from the farm. And there were darker rumors, whispers that never fully went away. Years earlier, Andreas and his daughter Victoria had been investigated for incest. The case was real. The sentence was real. The shame was public. Many believed it never stopped. Some believed little Joseph was not Victoria's child, but Andreas's. No proof, only suspicion. And in 1922, suspicion was enough to ruin reputations. One suspect stood out immediately: Lawrence Schlittenbauer, a neighbor, a former lover of Victoria, a man who may have believed Joseph was his son. Schlittenbauer was one of the men who entered the farm during the discovery. He knew the layout. He moved bodies. He handled the weapon. Too comfortably. Witnesses would later say something unsettling. Schlittenbauer allegedly opened the house door with ease, as if he already knew it wasn't locked. He searched the attic alone. He showed little visible fear. Some thought it was shock. Others thought it was familiarity. Police questioned him repeatedly. His alibis shifted, his explanations tangled, but nothing stuck. No blood on his clothes, no witness placing him there, no confession. And in a case already contaminated by careless handling, proof was impossible. Other suspects emerged. A disgruntled farmhand fired years earlier, a wandering vagrant seen nearby, even soldiers passing through the region. Each theory collapsed under scrutiny. Every lead dissolved into rumor. The weapon complicated everything. The mattock used to kill the family belonged to the farm, but part of it, the handle, was missing, never found, as if the killer had taken a piece of the crime with him, or kept it. Authorities began to fear the truth. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was planned. The footprints, the attic noises, the missing days before discovery. Someone had been watching, waiting, living above them. By the end of 1922, the investigation slowed. Files thickened, certainty thinned, and Hinterkaifeck became something worse than a murder case. It became a warning. Because if the killer was someone local, then he blended in perfectly, went home, lived a normal life, and never spoke a word. The idea refused to die. What if the killer had been there long before the first blow? Investigators returned to the attic. They searched for signs that someone had been living above the family. Quietly, patiently. The space was cramped, dusty, nearly impossible to move through without making noise. And yet, straw had been disturbed. Footprints marked the dust. Someone had been there. Neighbors remembered things they hadn't thought important at the time. A dog barking at night. Shadows in the windows. Sounds of movement when the house should have been asleep. Andreas had spoken of it openly. He said someone was watching them. No one listened. The footprints in the snow were re-examined. They led from the forest to the farm, but never back. It suggested something impossible, or something terrifying, that the person never left. The theory spread quietly through the village, that the killer lived in the attic, listening to conversations below, learning routines, waiting for the right moment, eating their food, using their tools, becoming part of the house. If true, it explained everything. Why there were no signs of forced entry. Why the murders were silent. Why the killer knew exactly when to strike. Why he stayed afterward without fear. He already belonged there. But there was no proof strong enough to stand in court. No fingerprints. No DNA. No witnesses. Only a house that felt wrong. In 1923, authorities made a decision. The farm was demolished. The buildings torn down. The land left empty. As if removing the structure could erase what happened inside it. It didn't. The murders of Hinterkaifeck became legend. Not because they were brutal. Many crimes were. But because of the patience, the intimacy, the idea that evil didn't arrive suddenly. It waited. Years later, new investigators reopened the case. Again and again. Modern profiling, psychological analysis, reconstructed timelines. Each effort pointed back to the same conclusion. This was personal, and the killer knew the family well. But names remained just that. Names. No arrest was ever made. No confession ever surfaced. And somewhere, buried under memory and time, the truth stayed hidden, like someone standing silently in an attic, waiting not to be discovered. Time moved on. Hinterkaifeck did not. The farm was gone, reduced to empty land and a quiet marker few people noticed. Fields grew where blood once soaked the soil. Children played nearby, unaware of what had happened beneath their feet. But the story never disappeared. It lingered. Investigators revisited the case for decades. New technologies, new theories, new eyes. Each time, the same truth surfaced. There was never a lack of suspects, only a lack of proof. Lorenz Schlittenbauer died without confessing. Other suspects passed into history. Witnesses aged, memories eroded. The case slipped further from justice with every passing year. Yet one detail refused to fade. The killer stayed. After the murders, he fed the animals. He ate meals in the kitchen. He walked the halls as if nothing had changed. That act alone transformed the crime from murder into something far more disturbing. Possession. Hinterkaifeck became a symbol of isolation, of ignored warnings, of how evil can exist quietly, without noise, without urgency, without haste. Modern profilers agree on one thing. This was not madness. It was control. Patience, familiarity, confidence. The kind of crime committed by someone who believed they would never be caught. And they were right. Nearly a century later, no one has been held accountable. No trial, no sentence, no ending. Just questions. Who walked out of that farm and returned to normal life? Who knew the layout of the house, the habits of the family, the sound of every floorboard? Who listened from above and waited? Hinterkaifeck remains one of the most chilling unsolved murders in history. Not because of what we know, but because of what we don't. And because somewhere, long ago, someone committed the perfect crime and took the truth with them into silence.